Army Specialist Darlene Crashock. Darlene was a 20-year-old soldier stationed at Fort Carson in Colorado in 1987. Just a few days before everything would fall apart, she would call home and tell her mother that something scary was going on at the base, but she couldn't tell her parents just yet what it was. The night she went missing was a Monday in March of 1987. She was out drinking with some fellow soldiers at a popular Colorado bar named Shuffles. Colorado Springs is about 15 minutes outside the base. It was a work night, so most of the group called it a night early. Eventually, everyone left except for Darlene. The last other person from their group stayed between midnight and 1 a.m. This would be the last time anyone that knew her would see her alive. It would be about 2 days before her body would be found, discarded in the snow behind a Korean restaurant. It was clear she'd been tortured, assaulted, and strangled. Sadly, the case would go cold quickly. The one thing in their favor was they had quite a bit of DNA, but this was 1987 and it was just in its infancy, so it needed to sit for a while before technology could catch up. It would eventually be uploaded to a database for known offenders, but there were no hits. As a result, her parents suffered for 32 years, praying that authorities would find the person who stole her away. The family took to carrying a Bible with Darlene's photo inside, a push of optimism that one day her case would be solved. Her parents even chose to bury Darlene in a civilian cemetery, with the idea being it would be easier to exhume her body if it was necessary later. They listed their greatest worry as not living long enough to see justice. Parabon Labs has a program that uses DNA to predict what someone may look like, and also generated this profile of the murderer, based on the DNA that was obtained at her scene. At this time, the Army offered a $10,000 reward to anyone who could identify the person depicted. While he does not look much like that photo now, in comparison to the LinkedIn profile for the man who was arrested, it's much closer. Police would eventually use genetic genealogy and the DNA left at the crime scene to search GEDmatch in hopes of catching the murderer. GEDmatch allows users like me, who had a site like 23andMe, again, like me, to upload our DNA for this purpose. Other ancestry and heritage sites offer the same service. You can download your raw data. It's a great way that everyday people can try to help get justice for those that haven't obtained it yet. This eventually led to 3 distant relatives of Michael White. Police tailed White until they caught him tossing away a cup. They tested that item and it confirmed what the police suspected. The DNA was a positive match. Michael had been living the life Darlene didn't get. He was stationed at the base also and eventually retired from the Army, married. He became a computer network specialist for 20 years and was about to retire after living a full, normal life. He had never been in trouble with the law. In June of 2021, Michael was sentenced to life in prison without the opportunity for parole. He has never disclosed why he murdered the young woman. The case was cold for 32 years, and if she had lived, she would be 54 today. Heide Firkus. In 2010, young wife Heide Firkus had her whole life ahead of her. She'd met her husband at a church 4 years earlier, and they'd been married for 2 years. The young wife was 25 and living in St. Paul, Minnesota with her husband, and then suddenly everything changed. In a moment's time, Heidi was dead. Her husband reported that the couple heard an intruder while they were upstairs. Nicholas, who was then 27, grabbed a double-barreled shotgun, and the couple went to check it out. The intruder rushed in and tried to remove the shotgun from the hands of Nicholas. In the process, Heidi was shot in the back. Nicholas was shot in his thigh and his groin. The home was secured, and there was no sign of forced entry, said the police. Nicholas described the intruder as a black man, but was not very specific as to what he looked like. That is until a few weeks later when he met with a private sketch artist. He was then able to suddenly be very specific. The man that was drawn was easily identified by the police. And it was in fact a man who had been breaking into homes in the area. Someone who had been on the news at the time, the problem being the man was already in prison, so he couldn't have shot Heidi. A year after Heidi died, the supervisor of the St. Paul Police Homicide Department said he had not been eliminated as a suspect, but they believed at the time that he was a victim and not a perpetrator. However, her family wasn't so convinced. Strange things came out shortly after her death that didn't add up. For instance, the day after her death, the house was to be foreclosed on. Her family stated this was something that she would never have hid from them, therefore they don't believe that she knew. In addition to being financially responsible, she was responsible just in general, so it's surprising that not one thing in the house was packed if she knew she had to move out the next day. The attorney described this as preposterous, stating that it was 2 kids who wrote out the free rent just as long as they could. The timing just happened to be a coincidence. 2 years after Heidi's death, in August of 2012, Nicholas married Heidi's best friend. The couple would go on to have 4 children and divorce in 2019. SWAT descended on the Firkus home, taking him into custody recently. There is no information as to how this came about or what the charges will be. The police brought Firkus to the police headquarters, and he was interviewed and then booked into Ramsey County Jail at 10:50 a.m. just a few days ago on suspicion of second-degree intentional murder as opposed to premeditated. He is now awaiting trial. The case of Heidi's murder went cold for 11 years. If she had lived, Heidi would be 36 years old today. Our third and final case is William Willett. William Willett was 62 in 2011 when a gun-wielding carjacker decided that he wanted Willett's Toyota Corolla. He coldly shot William in the process. The murderer only held onto the car for a few hours and it was quickly discovered. The murderous thief, however, was nowhere to be found. Recently, a cold case detective decided to take a fresh look at the case. He resubmitted the fingerprints found at the scene, and this time they got a hit. He would go on to point out that fingerprint evidence is one of the oldest forms of identifying criminal perpetrators that there is in existence. A grand jury issued a secret indictment earlier this year, charging LeBaron Tyrell Lockhart with the murder of the decade-old cold case. Police arrested Lockhart, 26, in early July 2021. Lockhart was just 16 in 2011. At the time, he had no criminal history. In the 10 years, however, he's been arrested for a wide range of crimes, including drug dealing and weapon charges. This is the second murder he's been tied to. He managed to avoid prison time for the most part so far. In February, a circuit judge revoked his probation for moving without telling his probation officer. The judge sentenced him to time already served, and he was let go again. In fact, so far, releasing him is much of what the justice system has done. He was involved in another robbery in 2016 that left a 19-year-old man named Dion Dixon dead. Despite being there, Lockhart wasn't even charged, and instead the prosecutors made him the star witness. It came out at the trial that another witness overheard Lockhart and the shooter. They were discussing how they were going to rob someone the day before it happened. The gun used belonged to Lockhart, and he gave it to Lott that day. The jury found Lott not guilty, and he was released also. In the Willett case, the police had nothing tying Lockhart to the killing until the fingerprint hit. Police have since warned how hard it is to get a conviction in a cold case. So I guess we shall see if a jury of his peers puts him away for good this time. He's currently awaiting trial. This case went unsolved for 10 years. The victim would be 72 if he had lived. Thank you everyone for watching and listening. If you haven't subscribed yet, I'd appreciate it if you would. Take care of yourselves and each other.